let's embark on an exciting journey for sustainable energy, focusing on challenges and opportunities for EU islands. With more than 2,000 islands that rely on non-interconnected electricity system, decarbonization become complex and critical. My name is Alifia Bintang Nugroho. Today with me is Lucija from Clean Energy for EU Islands. So what are your actual goals here today?
Hi, well, I'm really glad to join you today. And indeed, from the Clean Energy for EU Islands Secretariat, as you mentioned, we represent more than 2,000 islands in Europe, and we work together with the islands in the support of their drive towards energy transition. Yeah? There is different aspects in how we support them. We provide technical assistance. There is more than 30 islands that have decided on the ambition to reach 100% renewables by 2030, and additional follower islands are joining them soon. And in addition to that, we analyze what are the regulatory challenges that the islands have, which is also one of the parts that you mentioned in regards to the distribution systems and integration of renewables. And then finally, we offer a sort of network for the islands to exchange experiences between each other and also to meet once a year and hear what the other islands are doing.
Okay, this is very interesting because I'm curious, what are actually the specific challenges that non-interconnected islands face compared to interconnected regarding decarbonization? What do you think about
So
that?
we like to say, all islands, it depends how different countries define islands, but all islands are geographical sort of entities. And then interconnected islands in most systems are seen as part of the mainland. That's how they're treated when it comes to the management of the electricity grid. However, the non-interconnected islands, and there is more than 100 of non-interconnected islands in Europe, they're very specific systems in a sense that they have to provide security and quality of supply and increase integration of renewables, which we know creates some issues on the grid. So this is something that we looked into and we analyzed, and that, let's say, 3 to 5 key challenges are that islands, what we see is that even if they have renewable energy already integrated, they highly curtail them. Then we see that there is a lack of resources on the islands from the system operators. On one hand, financial to implement innovative solutions, but on the other hand, also human resources. People that actually know how to integrate renewables, how to make them work into their system and not create challenges, but more create support for the system. And then finally, it's also about regulation. Yeah? The grid codes that are out there, they're made for the mainland systems that are, let's say, very, very much interconnected, whereas that's not the case for non-interconnected islands. So these grid codes need to be upgraded and also adjusted to the islands.
Okay, I think you mentioned this and you would know better than me, but in my opinion, that regulatory framework is important. Could you highlight about the importance of that?
Yeah, so regulatory framework, it's a bit of a broad sort of topic when you say regulatory framework, yeah? What we looked into here specifically in the past 2 years, working with the system operators and regulators, is the regulatory framework that supports grid management and connection of renewables to the grid, yeah? And there, on one hand, as I mentioned, there is grid codes. On the other hand, it's also the connection of renewables and the connection permits. And this takes a long time. It can be very complicated and complex for the stakeholders that are not typical in the energy system, such as energy communities. And on the islands, we see that the local stakeholders want to be much more involved, and they want to be part of the new generation, that is using the local resources.
How does this framework from the European Union accommodate the needs of electricity from these islands that you mentioned?
Well, it could accommodate better, but the current, of course, we did a report which we published recently, where we analyzed the current European regulation and legislation that is relevant for the islands. Countries can ask for different, let's say, exceptions to the directives, electricity market directive, let's say unbundling or ownership of the storage, which is relevant for some of the non-interconnected islands as we see. Yeah?
Could you mention the proven effective solution in your opinion?
Yeah, well, we were lucky because, as you know, we were talking to the system operators, we were talking to the regulators to understand what are the challenges, but in that process, we also made sure that they create a network where they could exchange experiences with each other, and there they also exchange some of the best practices. We see, for example, Portuguese islands, specifically Madeira and Porto Santo, In Azores Islands, we also see examples of, let's say, vehicle to grid supporting the integration of renewables as a pilot project. We also see French islands that are managed by EDF, where we see integration of storage in different sort of aspects. There is behind the meter, then it evolved over, as in hybrid power plants, then it evolved over, let's say, centralized storage, which supports more the grid. We also see the Greek islands supporting hybrid power plants because they've really had a problem to connect additional renewables, and now that is being, let's say, progressed by integrating hybrid power plants. So we see different solutions. Also, the Northern Islands have a lot of good examples, and they can be, we learn from them, they can be used on the other islands, but in many cases, these systems, non-interconnected systems, are very specific from one another. So you can't really take an example and just replicate somewhere else. Yeah, you have to really understand the local system of the island and see if that specific solution is really optimal for that system.
It's interesting that you mentioned every study would be different because each area has different system boundaries, right? Moving forward to the technology side, I'd like to know your opinion. Which one do you think, technology-wise, is critical for flexibility and reliability, taking into account because we're trying to integrate a variety of renewable energy?
Yeah.
Which one is more critical?
I think now with the energy crisis, everybody's talking about energy,
Yeah.
you know, and it's something, it's a topic that it's on everybody's mind, everybody's lips, they want to know. But typically on the islands, people are dealing with a lot of other challenges. With the climate change, it's not only about energy, it's about water, it's about waste, it's about transport. What are the tourism? What are the needs of the island? There is limited resources. So we really support, and the system operators are really looking into options for sector coupling, for system integration. I think that's the first one that needs to come in at the planning stage, because if it doesn't come at the planning stage for the system operators, then it's really hard for it to be implemented later on. And these are typically silos of different organizations. Water and waste are typically treated on the local level or decided on the local level, whereas energy is typically top down. Yeah. Then we see the hybrid power plants, which I mentioned already. Then, of course, baseload. Baseload is the key here because typically islands still depend on the CO2, let's say CO2 emission technologies or fossil fuel technologies for the baseload. And we really need to decarbonize the baseload technologies. We need to see how local resources can be used so that they're complementary to each other, such as, let's say, PV and wind in certain areas. Can we use the technology to provide inertia to the system? We heard today, for example, from Minestro, an example for the baseload as well. So there is different renewable technologies that can be used for the baseload, but then, of course, the question is the investment. Yeah, how much is that going to cost? So it's always we always come back to the planning because, as I mentioned, energy is top down. A lot of planning comes from the top, and it doesn't take into account maybe the very specific things of that island system. So there needs to be more analysis and connection to the knowledge institute. So that's what we see. Yeah.
However, how does these renewable energy do to the grid stability, especially for interconnected islands? How does it affect the grid stability? What's the plan with that?
Yeah. So that's something that you hear from the islands immediately when you start talking to the islands, especially the ones that maybe have less experience and are starting to integrate renewables. They immediately say that their integration of renewables is creating disturbances on the grid. Yeah, this is why they have to curtail them to ensure security of supply, because in the end, it's the security of supply that's important for the island to have a good development. Yeah, so actually, it's the requirements that you put on those renewable energy systems when they're connecting. Are they smart? Can you remotely control them? What are you expecting of your inverters? Are you integrating renewables that will be there to support your system? Or are you integrating renewables that will just inject and, create disturbances to your system? So renewables are not to blame. It's just we cannot integrate with the same, let's say, specifications as we do on the mainland on the non-interconnected islands. So that's something that through the grid codes, we need to look into, yeah?
Interesting. There's a lot of planning for sure for the technologies. But also I'm curious about what's the role for the local communities? Also, what's the role for the stakeholders? How do you balance it? What's the envision that you have?
we see there is many examples on the European islands where the integration of renewables or the implementation of renewables has gone top down and then reached the problem because the locals were not informed. They did not know that these renewables were approved. They do not want them maybe specifically there, or they just wanted to be involved from the beginning. And that's where the Secretariat sort of comes in. We are sort of a middleman working together with the islands, but also with the national governments, but also with the Commission, and sort of trying to make sure that everybody's at the table. We work a lot with the local communities, and I think nowadays also the system operators are slowly realizing to have that local community involvement and hearing from them in the planning stage, yeah, and sort of knowing where the local stakeholders want to go, how they want to be involved. Do they want to be involved in the investment? Do they just want to know where it is, to be informed? So it goes through energy communities, but it also goes through municipalities, yeah?
Yeah,
Municipalities play a key role there.
And I read about that one of the recommendations is to improve operation and maintenance in the island. Which one could you highlight about that?
Yeah, so we talk about islands, and I mentioned that earlier, and maybe that's a bit of a, let's say, a surprising comment, but of course we say islands are good places where we can test new technologies, yeah? And I agree with that because it's smaller systems, it's easier to manage. However, you need to have resources and support for that new technology, and especially for the maintenance afterwards, yeah? You need to train people that are on the island that will stay there, people maybe from the system operator or from other stakeholders who know how this technology is working and how can it be maintained. So this is something that for the sort of maintenance and operation of the grid and maintenance and operation of the new technologies that you're introducing is really important for the islands. Of course, as they're further away from the mainland, that becomes even more important, yeah?
Amazing. I really like how everything is very specific, region specific, also people specific, local communities, energy communities, and all. From yourself, is there anything you would like to enhance more? What's your specific recommendations?
Well, I think in the report that I mentioned, we provided many recommendations, which I did not cover all of them. Of course, I can't. Yeah, but what we say there is these are the recommendations, and then it's on the islands and also member states to sort of choose which ones make the most sense for their system and for them to implement. Yeah, for us as a secretariat, we are there to support, as I mentioned, the islands that are involved with us. We have more than 100 islands that we're directly working with, and we're expanding that network, and we hope. We're also initiating this Pact for Island Grids, where we hope to sort of keep this network of the system operators, regulators that are relevant for the islands, communicating, exchanging practices, also working with the different stakeholders, and bringing, the, let's say, more civil side and the municipality side together with the typical energy stakeholders and operators. Yeah.
Amazing, Lucija. I really enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you so much for your valuable insight, and thank you for listening.